Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the live plenary track of the second day of the 21st Ifac World Congress. No other topic has dominated the public discussions and media outlets over the past months like the COVID-19 pandemic has. Many questions in this regard are well related to systems and control problem setups. To shine some more light on how the Ifac community can contribute to the fight against corona, the following plenary session addresses different control-related aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me introduce the chair of the Corona session, Teodoro Alamo, from the University of Seville.
Welcome everybody to the Corona session in the Ifac 2020 World Conference. I am Teodoro Alamo from the University of Sevilla, Spain, and I would like to thank Frank Algover for inviting me to be chair and organizer of the session. I would like also to thank Julian Berberich for his help in organizing the event. The key speakers are Nuria Oliver, Sara Del Valle, and Julio Normey. The panel discussion will be with the key speakers and also Julia Giordano, John Bacter Jorgensen, Masaaki Nakahara, Liwo Chang, and Victor Preciado. The first talk is Data Science to Fight Against COVID-19 by Nuria Oliver, who is Commissioner for Artificial Intelligence and COVID-19 at the Valencia government, Spain. The second talk is Real-Time Data Fusion to Guide Disease Forecasting Models by Sara Del Valle from Los Alamos National Laboratory, USA. The third speaker is Julio Normey from the Federal University of Santa Catarina, Brazil. His speak is entitled Control Strategies for COVID-19, Social Distancing Policies in Brazil. Data-driven decision-making relies on three pillars that are data science, epidemiology, and control theory. Our first speaker, Nuria Oliver, has a very strong background on data science. Our second speaker, Sara Del Valle, has a strong background both on epidemiology and data science. And Julio Normey is a control theory researcher who has also data science background. We propose what we call a 3M approach to the COVID-19. 3M because it's monitor, model, and making decisions. The first step is to access to the data sources which suffer from a lot of limitations. For example, lack of transparency, difficulties to access to single cases data. Cases are reported with changing criteria, time-varying number of tests, wide variety of data formats, and inconsistent data. We have published a review paper on this that's called Open Data Resources for Fighting COVID-19. Here you can find most of the open data repositories and the main difficulties that you're going to encounter in this field. The second step is to consolidate the time series. This is done by means of pre-processing data, using data reconciliation, data fusion, clustering methods, time series, and signal processing techniques. Once we've got the consolidated time series, the next step is to make the estimation of the state of the pandemic. You can do it by means of real-time epidemiology, in which you consider not only the COVID cases, but also mobility measures, social media, etc. You can consider also contact tracing, proactive testing, and state space estimation techniques, which have to be specialized to the epidemic models, which are nonlinear. It is also important to develop epidemic wave detection to be able to quickly react to an increase of the cases. With regard to the prediction models, We have the epidemic models, the simple ones, that you can make more and more complex, incorporating more compartmentals, more groups in your modeling, and you can make them consider also this spatial dependence that leads to spatial epidemiology. And one of the most critical points is how to fit the parameters of the model to the data. This is difficult because of the non-linearity of these models and also because of the limitation of the available data. When it comes to forecasting methods, you can use your epidemic models or you can use directly standard machine learning techniques like kernel methods, Gaussian processes, deep learning, linear methodologies, etc. It is also important to develop impact assessment tools that makes it possible to assess which is going to be the efficacy of the actions or the contagion measures in terms of spread of the virus, saturation of healthcare system, mortality rates, social economic impacts. Finally, the decision making. Here, the first issue is to consider the controllability of the pandemic, considering the different axes in which we can apply or affect the spread. We can use standard optimal allocation of resources. We can resort to the classical optimal control theory with the point principle, etc. And more recently, you can use some results of model predictive control. We have presented all this interplay between data science, epidemiology, and control theory, along with a detailed description on the 3M approach in this review paper. Well, now we proceed to the first talk. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to introduce the first key speaker, Nuria Oliver. She's a data scientist, commissioner for artificial intelligence and COVID-19 at the Valencian government, Spain, and co-founder of ELIS Alicante, which is the European Laboratory of Learning and Intelligent Systems. She has designed contact tracing methodologies, analyzed the role of mobile phones in the pandemic, and created a large-scale citizens' COVID-19 survey. In her talk, Data Science to Fight Against COVID-19, she will share her experience leading a multidisciplinary team of more than 20 scientists who have volunteered since March 2020.
This is Dr. Nuria Oliver, and I'm going to share with you the work that we have done in the Valencian region of Spain on using data science to fight against COVID-19. My life before COVID-19 wasn't about fighting against it, obviously. I was very focused on creating an ELIS unit in Alicante, Spain. ELIS is the European Laboratory for Learning and Intelligent Systems, and is a network of excellence of research in machine learning in Europe. The unit that I'm in the process of creating in Alicante is devoted to 3 topics: the computational modeling of human behavior using machine learning techniques, the development of intelligent user interfaces, and the tackling of human-centric challenges in AI. But of course, in March of 2020, COVID-19 happened, and Spain became one of the most affected countries in the world. Having worked in the past in the use of mobile data and machine learning to help tackle other pandemics or other infectious diseases, such as the H1N1 flu pandemic and Ebola and malaria, I felt compelled to try to help. So I reached out to the Spanish central government and the Valencian government with the idea of creating a task force of experts working on the use of data science to help make better decisions. My proposal was very well received by the Valencian government in Spain, and very quickly in March, we created such a task force. Perhaps one question is, why aren't those teams more frequent? And the reality is that there are a number of challenges. First of all, capacity, awareness, and digital mindset challenges, given that governments and public authorities do not have this digital mindset yet. There are also challenges related to accessing data and also, of course, concerns about privacy and data protection. However, all the projects that I will present today were used using aggregated anonymized data, so non-personal data with no privacy implications. There is also a gap between research and operational projects, and in situations such as a pandemic or a natural disaster, decisions need to be made in an immediate fashion, and there is generally no preparedness for such a concerted way of using data when decisions need to be made in such a fast way. This initiative in Spain has become very visible internationally, and we've been featured in media such as Politico and MSNBC. So what is it that we are doing? What we are doing is trying to bridge this gap, the gap between where the data is, understanding the data as a reflection of reality, and where decision and policymakers are. Ideally, we would like the decisions and the policies to be made based on the evidence, understanding that the evidence gets reflected in the data. But generally, there is this gap on how to connect the data to the policies. So to do that, we've created 4 research groups or research areas. The first one is mobile data analysis. Mobility is very important in the context of an infectious disease and a pandemic, because if people don't move, the disease doesn't spread and we don't have the pandemic. And that's why in most countries in the world, we have been undergoing mobility contention measures. The second team is working on building epidemiological models, models that would enable us to predict how many cases there will be in the future, how the pandemic will evolve, not only under current circumstances, but also under different scenarios. The third group is working on building predictive models of intensive care units, cases, hospitalizations, but also risk maps. And finally, the last working team is working on a citizen science project through a large online survey. Even with all this, we still have a gap because the result of all these work streams is still quite technical. So we do have a layer for interpreting the results and aggregating them and preparing them, where we collaborate very closely with a director general working for the president of the Valencian region. The team is mainly composed of scientists with machine learning, statistics, maths, and physics backgrounds. And depending on the working stream, there are some special skills, such as the visualization of spatiotemporal data for the mobility team, or very strong modeling background for the epidemiological team. These are the team members, and they belong to most of the universities in the Valencian region of Spain. We've been having a very intense way of working with daily meetings, and we've leveraged all the technology available for supporting online work of teams. This is an example of one of our daily meetings every day. So what is it that we have done in the context of the pandemics? Let's all very quickly share some of the results. In the mobile analysis data team, the main purpose was to be able to understand how the mobility has changed during the confinement measures, and also determine if that change in mobility has been enough. To do so, we have collaborated with the Spanish National Office of Statistics, which itself has collaborated with the 3 largest telcos in Spain, such that we have had access to large-scale aggregated mobile traces for the region of Valencia. This is a visualization of the data, and analyzing this data, we've been able to determine the changes in different types of mobility. First of all, we determine the changes in the radius of gyration. The radius of gyration is the radius of the circumference that covers most of the movements of a population. And we found that in the region of Spain, because of the confinement measures, the radius of gyration reduced it by 65%, which is even larger than the average of the Spanish population. We also analyzed the success of the Staying at Home campaign, where home is defined by one of these regions that the Spanish Office of Statistics defines. We get the aggregated mobile data only at this level of spatial granularity, which is pretty large. It has to have at least 5,000 people, and which means small municipalities will be all covered by one region, up to actually 70,000 people, and then larger municipalities will be split in multiple of these regions. In this map, we see the percentage of the population that didn't leave their area of residence during the day in the days of the confinement. The greener the area, the larger the number of people who stayed in their area of residence. And we see that during working days, 88% of the Valencian population, and during weekends, 92% of the Valencian population remained in their area of residence during the confinement. We've actually built a website which is interactive, and you can access it here, and you can play and look at all the different changes in mobility in the Valencian region using this mobile data. This is a visualization of the stay-at-home campaigns through time from the very first day of confinement, where there is still a lot of yellow and orange, which means relatively low percentages of people staying at home, and then very green areas during the period where there was no labor mobility during the first 2 weeks of April. We've also done all the analysis at the Department of Health level, because from a public policy perspective, the departments of health are meaningful. The Valencian region is divided in 24 departments of health. We also analyzed the labor mobility, and we found that roughly a third of the population went to work during the confinement and a third telework. By looking at the mobile data, we also looked at the percentage of people who spent the day in a cell different or in an area different from their area of residence. And we found on average, there was 60% fewer people during working hours outside of their area of residence than during a baseline day in November. So there was a significant drop also in labor mobility. These are some visualizations of the drop in labor mobility. The greener the cell, the larger the drop. And we see that during the week of March 24th, there were still areas that had a small drop in labor mobility. And then during the period where there was no labor mobility, there was a very significant drop all over the region. And again, we did the same analysis at the Department of Health level. Using the mobility data, we can also run a community detection algorithm and detect the regions that are self-contained, that actually have a lot of inner mobility and not a lot of mobility with other areas. And using that, we identified 14 self-contained macro areas that are interesting from an epidemiological perspective, because they have a lot of mobility within themselves, but not a lot of mobility with other areas. The Valencian region is a very touristic region, so we also analyzed tourism mobility, and we identify a very significant drop, even in the early days of the confinement. The second team is working on epidemiological models. Basically, we want to build computational models that would enable us to predict the number of cases under different scenarios. And these models also leverage and use the mobility variables computed from the first team. We've built two types of models. The first one are SIR metapopulation models, which are state-of-the-art metapopulation models in epidemiology, and that divide the population into different states, and there are different probabilities to move from one state to the next, from susceptible to exposed, from exposed to infections, and from infectious to recovered. These probabilities have been estimated for COVID-19, and we fitted a model to the data in the Valencian region with a pretty good sort of like correlation. We've also developed an agent-based epidemiological model that also we have fitted to the Valencian population and the Valencian number of cases, number of intensive care units, number of deaths, and number of hospitalizations. We've used these models not only to make predictions every day, but also to determine the impact of the confinement measures. And we have found that if we had done nothing in the Valencian region, by May 6, we would have had around 50,000 deaths as opposed to 1,279 deaths. The third team is working on predictive models, particularly on building risk maps, predictions of the intensive care units, hospitalizations, deaths, but also we carried out a study on herd immunity that I will describe a little bit later. And finally, we deployed a very large citizen survey to help us address some of the lacking of the data to be able to answer important questions such as, how were people getting infected during the confinement? So we defined this very short 25-question survey that you fill out only in 3 minutes. I invite you all to fill it out. And it addresses questions such as, what is the social contact behavior of people during the confinement? What is the economic and labor impact of the pandemic? What's the resilience of people towards the measures? What's the prevalence of symptoms, testing availability, and emotional impact? The survey is available here and it's been translated to many languages. It became vital in the first 44 hours after deployment, which enabled us to collect a huge sample. And we've already published a preprint with all the results of the analysis of the first wave of the study. It was so successful that we decided to leave it open, and we analyzed the data weekly. It's been running for 12 weeks already. And you can see all the data for all the different countries where it's being deployed in this website here. We had lots of very interesting results that I don't have the time to present, but I just wanted to share with you a couple of insights. The first one is that the emotional impact of the pandemic seems to have been the biggest among the youngest people. They are the ones that report the largest numbers of loneliness, sadness, anxiety, or even stress. Moreover, there is a very clear excessive use of technology by children, which is worrisome. The resilience of the population has been going down over time. That is, when we ask people, how much longer do you think you could stay confined? The most popular answer has usually been 1 month. However, we see a drop in the number of people that report that they could stay 1 month, and we see a very significant increase in the number of people that say that they cannot stay any longer. And this is actually also related to the perception of the measures by week, where at the beginning of the pandemic, most people reported that they expected the government to do more, to take more measures. And 5 weeks later or 6 weeks later, the most popular answer started to be that, we've done enough, we don't need to do any more measures. The resilience towards the measures is very highly impacted by economic impact, emotional impact, and age. The larger the economic impact, the larger the emotional impact, and the lower the age, the lower the resilience towards the measures. We've also analyzed the impact per profession, and we find that some of the most prevalent professions in the Valencian region, such as hospitality, commercial, and construction, are among the most affected. Another interesting study that we did was analyzing whether there was a situation of herd immunity or not. And we did this back in April. We used 3 different methods to estimate the percentage of the population that might be immunized with coronavirus. The first method was using the answers to the survey, and we estimated that around 2% of the Valencian population would be immunized. The second method was using the reported deaths. We infer how many cases would you need to have to explain the reported deaths. And we obtain a range between 1 and 3% with an average of 2.37%, which actually has been corroborated by a seroprevalence study a couple months later. And finally, we also estimated the prevalence using an epidemiological model, and we also obtained around 2.3% of the population. So we do not have a situation of herd immunity. And because of that, our focus right now is on quarantine, testing, and contact tracing. We are analyzing how many contacts people have in a week, the types of professions that are the most correlated to having a lot of contacts, and also what is the impact of doing contact tracing on the epidemiological curve. We find that around 50% of contact tracing should be enough to actually flatten a lot the epidemiological curve. And finally, we are building this patient funnel to have some early warning systems that would enable us to very quickly detect situations where the number of cases is increasing. We are using both the answers to the survey and also social media information. And this is an example of our prevalence estimator from the answers to the survey. So in conclusion, I hope that I have been able to share a little bit with you this what I think is an inspiring initiative of having experts and citizens working together with high-ranking officials to help contribute to more science-based and evidence-based public policy making. Thank you very much.
I am pleased to present our second key speaker, Sara del Valle. Sarah is a scientist and deputy group leader at Los Alamos National Laboratory, where she works on the development of mathematical, statistical, and computational models for infectious diseases. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, she has been working with a group of scientists at Los Alamos Laboratory on developing a real-time global forecasting model for COVID-19. This model is part of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's COVID-19 forecasting effort. In her talk, Real-Time Data Fusion to Guide Disease Forecasting Models, she will describe some of the mathematical models that she has been developing in response to COVID-19.
Hello, this is Sarah Del Valle. Thank you for the invitation to talk to you about real-time data fusion to guide disease forecasting models. I think it's a very exciting time for mathematical modeling given the role that it has played in helping understand and helping mitigate the spread of COVID-19. And so I'm very excited to talk to you about what we're doing to forecast COVID-19. Here's a short outline about my presentation. I'm going to start with the history of pandemics and then the history of epidemic modeling. And then I will describe our effort regarding how we are forecasting COVID-19 in real time. And at the end, I will conclude with some of the challenges and opportunities in this field. So I wanted to start with the history of pandemics because I think it is important for us to know that infectious diseases have always been a critical part of human history. Since the beginning of recorded history, there's been epidemics that have invaded populations, often causing many deaths. And as you can see here, there's a list of many of the pandemics that have invaded humans, and they have caused a lot of deaths. And you can see the death toll here along the lines. And if you look at some of them, for example, the Black Death, it caused approximately 200 million deaths. Smallpox is estimated to have caused about 56 million deaths. The Spanish flu in 1918-1919 is estimated to have caused between 40 and 50 million deaths. And most recently, the HIV/AIDS pandemic, it's estimated to have caused between 25 and 35 million deaths. So as you can see, understanding the impact that pandemics have had in humans is important, and also developing ways and developing strategies to help reduce the burden of infectious diseases is very important. And so thankfully, there's been many important medical discoveries and breakthroughs that have helped reduce the impact of infectious diseases, from vaccines to germ theory to genetics to antibiotics and x-rays. And many of these have actually drastically reduced the number of deaths of many of these diseases. But we still need more ways to be able to respond to newly emerging epidemics such as COVID-19. And for that reason, I want to propose a new way that we can also help mitigate the spread of infectious diseases, and that is real-time disease forecasting. And this approach borrows a lot of the lessons that we learned from weather forecasting, that basically you have observations that are captured from many different sensors, from satellite imagery to ground sensors. You combine them with physics-based models that incorporate the nonlinear dynamics of weather to develop a probabilistic forecast of hurricanes and weather with quantified uncertainty. And we feel that this same approach actually can be applied into infectious diseases. We have data that is real, that it may be available in real time, and it's voluminous, it's extremely noisy. It can come from clinical surveillance networks, it can come from social media or even satellite imagery. You can combine them with mathematical, statistical, and computational models to develop probabilistic forecast of infectious diseases with quantified uncertainty. And something that people don't realize is the economic impact that weather forecasting has had in our lives. And because we were able to forecast hurricanes and other storms and events, we are now able to evacuate people and basically reduce the economic and population impacts. In just the same way that we're using weather forecasting, we feel that we can also use disease forecasting and be able to better prepare and respond to infectious diseases and hopefully minimize the global burden that they're having in our lives. So before I continue, I wanted to make a very major differentiation between forecasts and projections, since today I'm going to be focusing on forecasts. Forecasts attempt to predict what will happen based on current trends, whereas projections attempt to describe what would happen given certain hypotheses or what-if scenarios. And although both of these approaches are important for understanding and mitigating disease spread, I'm going to be focusing on forecasts because I'm trying to have a direct translation of weather forecasting into disease forecasting. And so now I'm moving into the history of epidemic modeling. Epidemic modeling has been used through a history to understand and help mitigate the spread of diseases. And there's evidence that in 1592, John Grant used different data and analyzed the various causes of deaths. He was able to estimate the risk of dying from various diseases. In 1855, John Snow provided a very valuable contribution to understanding infectious diseases by performing a spatial analysis of cholera. And so basically he mapped all the cholera cases in London and was able to identify a water pump in Broad Street in London as the source of infection for cholera. In 1911, Sir Ross introduced the first compartmental model for malaria that included both mosquitoes and humans, and was the first one to basically introduce a threshold that describes how we didn't really need to get rid of all the mosquitoes, but we can basically get rid of a certain threshold in order to mitigate the spread of malaria. And then in 1927, Kermack and McKendrick published a series of papers describing the transmission of communicable diseases. And they basically provided the foundation of what epidemic modeling is today, and by introducing the Susceptible-Infectious-Recovered Model. In this model, you basically break the population into three compartments: the susceptible, the infectious, and the recovered compartment. And the rate at which people move from the susceptible to the infectious class is described by many different factors, but that can incorporate contacts. It can incorporate a beta term, which includes the transmission or the susceptibility of a susceptible person. We know that for COVID, that it appears that senior people are more susceptible, and so you can incorporate that in your model. The infectiousness of the infected person could also be incorporated in this beta factor. And the rate at which people move from the susceptible class to the infectious class is when an infected and a susceptible person come basically in contact with each other. The model then describes how people move from the infectious to the recovered class, which is dependent on this value delta, which is a recovery rate. And for this model, you can estimate the R0, or the average number of secondary cases that an infected person can produce, and is described here. And so if you used certain initial conditions in your model, then you can see a graph, something similar to what I have here, that basically you can see how the susceptible population declines as a function of time and how the recovered class increases as a function of time, and then you have an epidemic curve shown here in red. And so we're using these kind of basic modeling approaches to now forecast COVID-19 in real time. And so we have been forecasting COVID-19 cases and death since early April, and our website is available at covid-19.vsbgateway.org. And we have forecast for confirmed cases and deaths at the country level for all countries that are reporting over 100 cases and 10 deaths. And we're also providing forecasts for the United States at the state level. And if you go into our website and then you can click on the model description, you can find a little bit more information about our model. But in a nutshell, basically we are combining a compartmental model and a statistical model to forecast the cases and the deaths. And the way we model the way people move from the susceptible to the confirmed cases to the deaths, it actually uses a very similar approach as the SIR model that I described earlier. However, we learned the growth rate and the case fatality rate from data, and that's where the statistical Bayesian model comes into place. Initially, we assumed that the growth rate would decline as a result of mitigation strategies because a lot of countries had actually implemented shelter-in-place restrictions. But now that those restrictions have been lifted or relaxed, we have relaxed that assumption. One of the strengths in our model is actually the ability to adapt quickly to situations it wasn't anticipating. And this is something that we learned from forecasting the flu for several years. We've been actually part of this CDC effort that forecasts the flu every year. And we realized that if we constrain the model to the past, we would not be able to sometimes forecast things that we didn't know, we were not anticipating. And so that is something that we've learned from the flu, and especially for COVID, given that it's a newly emerging pandemic, we didn't know how it was going to spread. So we wanted to make sure that our model was flexible so that it could adapt to situations it wasn't anticipating. However, one of the downsides of our model is you can struggle in geographies where there's little or no data. So that's why we are restricting the forecast to countries that have over 100 deaths, 100 cases and 10 deaths. So once you click in either a country or a state, you will see the forecast for each of those regions. But we start with a situational update. Here we have what's happening with the confirmed cases in pink and what's happening to deaths in purple. And as you can see, the top shows the cumulative confirmed cases for the United States, and the bottom is showing the newly daily confirmed cases for the United States. And as you can see, the number of both cases and deaths have been increasing since early June. In our website, we also provide the short and longer term forecasts. The top, we're showing figures for the 7-day forecast, and in the bottom, we're showing the tables that show the 6-week forecast for both cumulative cases in pink and cumulative deaths in purple. And as you can see, the number of cases and deaths are expected to continue to rise. And in 6 weeks, we are estimating, over 3 million cases in the United States and over 140,000 deaths in the United States. Another piece that we felt was very important to include in our website was model performance. We felt that if people are planning to use our forecast for decision support, that they needed to know how accurate our model was. And so for that reason, we are providing model performance in our website. And so each of these panels basically compares the forecast against the data, so you can see how well our model was doing for different dates when the forecasts were released. And we're releasing forecasts every Monday and every Thursday. In addition to comparing the forecast against the actual data, we're also providing like a short description of which model basically closely tracked the actual cases. And so here we have like best case, middle case, and worst case, and you can see that short description on the top. So one of the biggest challenges for us has been human behavior. Unlike weather, that whether or not you bring your umbrella to work, you are actually not changing the outcome. If it's going to rain, it's going to rain, and if it's not going to rain, it's not going to rain. For infectious diseases, human behavior is very important because diseases are transmitted from person to person. Whatever people do, even at the individual level, can have an impact at the population level. And so understanding what people are doing, compliance to social distancing restrictions and compliance to face masks, it's very important for us to know, because all of those behaviors are going to have an impact in the forecast. Other challenges for us is that we are forecasting confirmed cases, but we know that it's very different than the actual number of cases. There's been evidence that many people don't show any symptoms, and so we don't really have a good way to capture those people, or there may be people that never get tested, and therefore we are not able to capture them. Because we are forecasting and not projecting, we need to be able to validate our forecasts against measured targets. And because the only thing that is currently being measured is confirmed cases, that's why we're restricted to forecasting confirmed cases. However, people can use projections to estimate actual number of cases. It's also challenging because there are many other challenges, such as testing, and we don't really know how many people are getting tested, and also how many tests are available. There are countries that may not have as many tests, and therefore the numbers may be low, or people may not just be getting tested just because it may be overwhelming. Also, we needed to balance between adaptability and narrow prediction intervals. As I mentioned earlier, we wanted our model to be flexible and be able to adapt to things that it wasn't anticipating, and for that reason, then we tend to have a little bit wider intervals. But the one thing we want to propose is ensembles. Ensembles can actually raise the floor to forecast performance, and just like the way we use weather forecasting and hurricane forecasting, where you see many different paths and tracks for the hurricane, we feel that you can build a more robust system when you have many different models contributing to a forecast. So in conclusions, epidemic forecasting is still in its infancy, but it's a growing field with great potential. And I feel very confident that we can actually now forecast infectious diseases. And hopefully by forecasting them, we will be able to know what's coming and be able to better respond and prepare for newly emerging infectious diseases or re-emerging infectious diseases. However, that some of the challenges are data availability. Thankfully for COVID-19, there's many organizations and ministries of health and governments that have come together and decided to make data available, but this is not always the case. Also, human behavior, as I mentioned earlier, this is one of the biggest challenges for accurate disease forecasting. And another issue that we need to take into consideration is that we need to be able to capture the uncertainties associated with each data stream, especially if we're using different data streams to derive forecast. And finally, I just want to thank the team behind COVID-19.BSV Gateway Forecast, because there's a whole lot of people behind this project, and so I just want to give a shout out to them, because they are developing models, keeping the website up to date, and also helping us review the forecast. So thank you once again for the opportunity to talk to you, and please feel free to check out our website.
It is a great pleasure for me to introduce Julian Ormei, the third key speaker of the session. Julian Ormei is a full professor at the Department of Automation and Systems Engineering at the Federal University of Santa Catarina, Brazil. He and his research team are collaborating with researchers from the University of Brasilia, developing models for the pandemic in Brazil and designing model predictive controllers to determine when to implement social isolation or lockdown measures. He will share with us his experience in his talk, Control Strategies for COVID-19, Social Distancing Policies in Brazil. Thank you very much, Julio.
Good afternoon. Thank you to Doro for your nice words and for sharing this session. It's a pleasure for me to be here in this important Congress and in this special session, together with Nuria and Sara, talking about this important topic. In this talk, I will present some results related to the application of control strategies for COVID-19 social distancing policy in Brazil. The results I will present are from a collaborative research work of the University of Santa Catarina and Brasilia in Brazil. The COVID-19 pandemic seems to be the global health crisis of our time. It causes several acute respiratory syndromes, we can become potentially fatal. It has already spread to almost every country of the world, infecting a lot of people. Since vaccines have not yet been developed, most countries have adopted measures to ensure social distancing, aiming to avoiding the spread of the pandemic. Therefore, with social distancing policies, the health system do not have to deal with hospital bed shortage associated with a large peak of infection, since the demands for treatment become distributed over time. This figure illustrates the evolution of symptomatic individuals due to the virus with respect to no-isolation and hard isolation conditions. The result represents an estimate of the numbers of available intensive care units in hospital beds. It can be seen how the social isolation policy attenuates the peak and allows the health system to not saturate. On the other hand, isolation policies have a drawback. Countries that implement rigid social distancing measures have been seen devastating economic effects. Thus, we have a trade-off between reducing the peak and causing a hard negative effect in the economy. The problem to solve then is how to determine the time and duration of social distancing policies. The idea of this work was to model the evolution of the pandemic, then use this model to compute prediction, and finally, define an optimal control action. And then we propose to use model predictive control for this problem. Model predictive has several advantages. It naturally works with prediction and delays in the model of the process. Several objectives as well as system constraints can be considered in the control problem formulation, and it gives an optimal solution. Thus, this is the agenda of this talk. First, we are going to present the Brazilian situation. Then, we will analyze some modeling aspects. In the sequence, the proposed control solution will be presented. And finally, a simulation study and some conclusions will be given. Let's start with the Brazilian situation. Brazil is a big country with more than 8 million square kilometers and more than 200 million inhabitants. We have several regions with big difference in social economical conditions. Also, we have many people living in precarious conditions. With no clean water or sewer system, in house where 8 or 10 people live in the same room. Moreover, another important point is that each state and city defines local policies related to isolation or social distance measures. Thus, it is difficult to measure the effect of different policies. Brazilian government, both local and federal, gives daily the number of active infections and deaths. However, there are many studies that point out the error in this data is very significant. There is a big sub-notification, mainly caused by the absence of mass testing. Only very ill people is tested in the hospital, and there are a lot of asymptomatic individuals. Here you can see the situation in the number of infected individuals from the first case reported in February up to the end of June. Note that the difference in the number of confirmed cases between states in the country. This second figure shows the same situation for the number of deaths. Comparing with the previous figure, we can see that the relationship between the number of confirmed deaths and the confirmed infected case varies a lot in the different regions and states of the country. Also, this number confirms the error in the data and the sub-notification mainly in the infected case. Now we will present some modeling process. Because of some constraints, I'm only going to highlight the important ideas used in our model. We consider a modified version of the Susceptible-Infectious-Recovered Model. Why modified? Because it includes a new variable to account for the effects of social distancing measures according to the evolution of the disease. With this idea, we consider the dynamic response of the population to social distancing policies. The model has several parameters that have been to be estimated. Thus, we need an identification method. In this work, we use nominal and inconsistent data condition in order to take into account the error in the published data. Also, an uncertain and way least square criterion was used to estimate the parameters of the model. Not that using nominal, that official, and inconsistent data, we can try to estimate the worst case condition. This figure illustrates the model identification ideas. The available data, active infections, new infection, and deaths, and the estimates, uncertainty, are used in the model identification. In the model, the susceptible individuals that can be infected are divided into groups, symptomatic and asymptomatic. Part of them, death, and the rest are considered recovered. Using affective feedback control optimal, we decide when to apply the isolation. Then we model the response of the population to this control, which is used to modify the relationship between the susceptible and infected individuals. Here you have the set of equations used in the model, where you can see the variables that model the quantity of individuals in the different groups. Also, we see the new introduced variable phi that considers the effect of the social isolation. The dynamics of phi is given by this new equation, where you can see the effect of the control action U. U is binary. Therefore, we can an isolation or no isolation condition, but phi does not vary instantaneously with U. We model a time constant, which imposes a delay in the response, and also a variable gain, which is less than 1. That is, we are not going to obtain a perfect control. That means it's not possible to achieve perfect isolation. Finally, in this set of equations, there are many parameters to be estimated. This is done using a least square method. For that, we divide the available data in two parts. The first part of the data is used in the identification step, and the rest of the available data in the validation step. Here you can see some of the results from February to June. The dotted red line shows the real measurement data. And as can be seen, the nominal model in black lines fit the data very well, both for cumulative number of infected cases and deaths. The other curves show the different simulated uncertainty cases, considering the estimated subnotification. As can be seen, the results are very different for the nominal case. This implies that all the control policies to be applied in Brazil should be conservative, because we really don't know the exact situation. The same result can be seen for the deaths, infected case, and the cumulative number of infected cases when predicting the variables in a long-term horizon, in this case, from February to November. Again, the uncertainty in the variable data causes significant difference in the results. Let's talk now about the control strategy. We propose to use an MC controller. Here, you have a block diagram of the control operation. The process in this case is the SARS-CoV-2 contagion. The outputs of the process, I and D, are used in the model together with the control action U to compute a set of predictions of S, I, R, and D in a definite horizon. These predictions and the constraints are used in an optimization algorithm which minimizes a cost function that takes into account the objectives of the control. This optimization gives as a result a sequence of control action UK at each sampling time. The first control action of this sequence is applied, and the procedure is repeated in the next sampling time with the new incoming data. Here are the details of the objective function G to be minimized, and the main constraints. In the control function, the first terms take into account the infected symptomatic individuals. The second term considers the control action, used to determine isolation policies as little time as possible. An important constraint is to ensure that the peak of the number of infected symptomatic individuals is smaller than a number that depends on the number of available EQ. We have a slave variable in this constraint in order to avoid infeasibility. The other constraint maintains the same control action 1 or 0 for a minimal period of days, NM. Note that it's not viable to change the isolation condition every day or every 2 days, for example. The complex problem to be solved at each sampling time is a minimized J subject to the model constraints. The constraint previously explained related to the infected individuals, and also that the condition of U being a varying variable. As mentioned, only U is applied and the problem is solved again in the next sampling time. We use MATLAB, ULMeet, and BNB solver to compute the control action in this procedure. Now we will show you some results. This figure shows the result of an open loop simulation considering no isolation and hard isolation condition in two different cases, with official data, that is nominal case, and with uncertainty caused by subnotification in the worst case. The first part of the graphic has known data, and the second part of the graphic are predictions. As can be seen, the peak of the infected individual and the number of deaths are strongly affected by the uncertainties, and both values can be attenuated a lot if a hard isolation policy are adopted. However, this open loop solution could produce very bad effects in the Brazilian economy. This figure shows, with more details, is a zoom on the previous figure, the result we obtained. Observe that hard isolation could achieve a peak of infected individuals near the available EQ beds in the nominal case. In this figure, we can see the result of a closed loop simulation considering the MPC strategy for the best case, using periods of 25 days in no isolation mode of the MPC strategy. In our study, we consider in the problem several possible period lengths, and the one with 25 days gives the better result and was used in the MPC. Again, we compare here the non-isolation case, and we show the result with the official data, nominal case. As can be seen, in the nominal case, the peak of active infected individuals with symptoms will occur in July, and a second peak in September, with reasonable results. In the no-isolation case, the results are a disaster, with a peak bigger than 1.7 million active symptomatic infected individuals. It's important to note that this illusion is the same as the hard isolation one until the first time the MPC decides to relax the isolation, which is in this case in 20th of August. From that date on, the MPC tries to use the smallest isolation periods as possible to avoid hard negative effects in the economy. This figure shows the result of the control action. Now how the controller predicts periods of isolation and no-isolation of at most 25 days in no-isolation mode until the middle of 2021. Also in this figure, you can see the dynamics of our variable phi. Here you can see the deaths, again, for the case without control and with the MPC in the nominal case. Note that the important effect of the controller in decreasing the number of deaths. In this last figure, we introduce the model uncertainty effects in both the open loop case and the MPC case. As can be seen, the peak of active infected individual is strongly affected by the uncertainties in both cases. Also, the day when the peaks occur is affected by uncertainty in the data. We consider here the uncertainties caused by subnotification in the worst case. Note that uncertainty can drive this result to a very bad situation in the country, even with the application on optimal isolation policies. Well, it's now time for some conclusions. Regarding the dynamics of the spread of the virus and model aspect, we can conclude that the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 virus is inherently complex and varies according to multiple factors that are difficult to measure or estimate. Thus, exact prediction of pandemic dynamics is not possible. In the particular case of Brazil, we really don't know where we are, which kind of isolation we have applied, and how the population reacted to the control action. Very important, taking into account the uncertainty margin is fundamental then to achieve results that can be used in practice. Regarding the proposed MPC strategy, we observe that it indicates to maintain social isolation until August, and then suggest to use some relation periods. These relaxation periods have 25 days of duration and should be used until the middle of 2021 to maintain the spread of the virus under control. Finally, the study points out that with the current zone notification situation and the delays between control action and the observed effects, to design a control policy is difficult, and governments should consider the worst case estimation in the data to take some policies. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. And I also would like to thank the Ifac 2020 organizers, Mass University, and our National Research Council in Brazil.